the war in Ukraine, given its importance for some of the most powerful countries in the world, certainly created a context in which many of us who were working in newsrooms became a sort of war reporter overnight, even though there were some horrible conflicts going on in the world way before that. But the visibility of this latest conflict has confirmed what we already knew. War reporting has changed dramatically in the last decades, and today we will discuss about what that means and what challenges, but also opportunities come with it. Welcome to the changing face of war reporting in the digital era.
As politics, society, and media evolve, so does the way in which we cover conflicts. Social media play a big role. They have turned traditional war reporting on its head, and they can be weaponized for disinformation. How do wars affect journalistic work in the age of social media and citizen journalism? Join the discussion, the changing face of war reporting in the digital era.
That's right, and of course, I would like to welcome our guests for this panel. Joining us on stage is the editor-in-chief of Ukrainska Pravda, one of Ukraine's biggest media outlets. Please welcome Sevgil Musaiea. We also welcome the director of the Seven Foundation, war photographer Ron Haviv. Journalist, reporter, and also part of the Crisis Project, behind the scenes at the front line for the German broadcasters, Fabian Janssen. And my colleague, Flourish, head of the DW Lagos Bureau. Welcome, Flourish. And of course, a very warm welcome to everyone who is joining us online from wherever they are. We hope you take part in this discussion, which is, of course, a very hot topic I'm very honored to be discussing here at the Global Media Forum. I'd like to start by bringing us to the here and now. Many have compared the war in Ukraine with the Gulf War as a pivotal moment in journalism history. Now, Sevgil, do you agree with that assessment? How would you describe the moment journalism is living?
Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for your support. Thank you for your support of our country and our fight for the right not only to exist, but be European state, democratic state, and one of the main essential value of democracy is freedom of speech. And of course, I think that it's a tipping point of our profession, and I will describe why, actually. For me, it's not only the war for the right of our country to exist, not only war between two systems, I mean democracy and authoritarian regimes, but also the war for the truth. And maybe I will share a story of my colleague, and it will also help you understand why. So it was the beginning of March last year, 2022. The part of Kiev region was already under Russian occupation, and one of our colleagues, his family, decided to stay in Bucha. You know all the name of Bucha, this small village near Kiev region. And so family decided to stay. They left together with his kid and his wife to a safe place. And then suddenly one day, in the beginning of March, I asked only one simple question in a news chat. So how is your parents? How are your parents? So could you tell us? And the question was, my father was shot dead by Russians. And it was just a silence in our newsroom after that. So, and then we didn't know any details about what happened. So mom was still there. We didn't ask him questions. But we already knew that something going on in Bucha. We heard it from people who escaped that. We interviewed a lot of people in this bridge. Unfortunately, I also lost my good friend of mine, Brent Renault, brilliant film documentary, who came to Irpin, and he was also shot dead by Russians. But only after Bucha was deoccupied by Ukrainian soldiers and journalists had an access to Bucha, we were able to show this truth. 458 people who were killed in Bucha, in only one small village. And we counted then that for all people who stayed in this small village, every sixth person was killed. Every sixth person in this small village. And you know, like Bucha became a big story. Bucha became kind of an evidence what Russia did in Ukraine. And it was a very right moment. And then I had a talk with one of the dissidents, Soviet dissident, and he just told me very simple sentence that unfortunately we didn't have an access to these places. We also reported about human rights violations, but nobody listened to us. And when you show these evidences, when you show all this cruelty, when you show all these painful moments, people listen to you and people understood that it's okay, this is something that you just cannot accept. So this is a very crucial moment for journalism. And you do remember what Russia said out of that Bucha is staged, it's faked, and then this is the battle for the truth began. And you know, even this year, New York Times team, they received the Pulitzer Prize for their investigation about Bucha. They were able to show all these evidences. We also wrote a story about this father of our colleague who was killed. We definitely found all evidences, people who did it. We interviewed neighbors. We were able to find even, like, it's difficult to say about it, but we found even his corpse only after 1 month after when it happened, because it was just a mess with all these bodies, and it's still a big, big issue for Ukrainian journalists. But we think that we celebrated the truth, but it's not like that. It is still going on, and we still we think that, yeah, this is a victory of truth, but it's not. And that's why we all Ukrainian journalists, and I know that some of our colleagues in this big room today, and I'm really proud of all representatives of journalism in Ukraine, because we overcome this so many challenges, so many difficulties. We lost our parents, we lost our natives, but we are still able to continue our job. We are able to find all evidences, and we dream about accountability. And today, Madame Berbeck, she told about accountability, and it's also one of the goals of journalism this era. And accountability in war, Ukrainian war, is extremely important now. And that's why from all our work, from all journalists' work in Ukraine and foreign reporters, depends actually what will happen next. And that's why even this year we launched a conference in Bucha in memory of all people who were killed in Bucha. And also just to let you know about all challenges that Ukrainian journalists face and foreign reporters in Ukraine.
One of those challenges that you mentioned is a matter of access. You can give her a round of applause for sure, to her and to all the brave journalists in Ukraine for the courageous work that you're doing. You mentioned a problem that is an old problem for sure, which is access to the regions in which something is happening. But we also want to focus on the current era and what it means and what has changed. So Ron, I would like to ask you, as an experienced war photographer, how would you describe the most important difference that we have now? So very often it is talked about the fact that journalists, at least in Western liberal countries, which of course is a bias, but we have to recognize it, are now able to directly file their work to their media outlets or to their own platforms without direct censorship. What has changed when reporting from the front lines from your perspective?
Well, I think that over the course of my career, which is about 30 years, and this is the 26th conflict that I've covered in Ukraine, things have changed dramatically. Obviously, technology has enabled us to be able to reach larger audiences faster with more material. And that has enabled the world to see things usually often in real time or near real time, depending on the media that's being put out there.
And what effect do you think that has for the people receiving the news?
I think it's both a positive and a negative effect. I think without question, there are many times when we are putting information out there, especially imagery, without context, without actually understanding what we're looking at, that can lead to misinformation, misunderstanding, and poor journalism. And there are other times when it's absolutely necessary, in that we are, without question, often the ones who are not only giving information to the public at large, but also to governments and armies and other people that can react to what they're seeing. But I think often, and coming back again, using Bucha as a great example, and Ukraine as an example, Ukraine will be now, without question, the most visually documented conflict in the history of visuals and war. And it comes at different stages. One is this kind of immediacy, journalists being in the field. I was one of the first journalists to arrive in Bucha, our documentation of what happened there. But then even more so, when you look at New York Times, Bellingcat, and others being able to put together through different visuals, through video from bank machines and street signs and so on, putting everything together, we're able to really understand what is going on and what has happened.
You mentioned it, the most visible conflict ever so far. That also, of course, poses a big challenge for not only the reporters on the ground, but also on the receiving end, in the newsrooms. Fabian, from your perspective, as part of a big project that works with journalists on the ground, what difficulties arise in the current age?
So I think one of the difficulties is to reach young audiences, for example, with conflicts and wars, and also like in this, like you have channels like TikTok or other things where so many disinformation also spread it. So like to be their trustable source and reach the audiences that maybe not get to know all the conflicts and all the backgrounds, and bring them on the newest part of information, like, but also show them like what is going on.
When we talk about the digital era, the digital age, we are all assuming that everyone has a stable internet connection and that they are everywhere with their cell phones with a 5G at least connection. Of course, Flourish, the context can change dramatically from one country to the other. You work in a very diverse region. What difference does it make when you have a country that has not a broad mobile internet available when it comes to war reporting and the control of the information that gets out of there?
Well, the difference is that many of the people in those countries, with the little internet that they have, they are only on the receiving end. And so people or, governments are able to make use of internet as a weapon in a way to kind of create their own narrative. And so people are receiving images and videos, and they're not able to verify whether or not this is true. And so there's a lot of confusion. For example, I just came back from Mali, reporting in Mali, and one of the major problems is fake news. And many of this, fake news is spread on WhatsApp, pictures and videos, and people just don't know anymore what is true or what is false. And fact-checking organizations and journalists have a limit to what they can do because it's a military-ruled country. And many of this information is actually propaganda created by media organizations that are funded by the military. So there's really a limit to what they can do. I think the solution there is for many journalists in the region where I work, which is West Africa and Africa, to be more like a step ahead in terms of technology and being aware of how AI works, learning about, how to verify images, verify, information that is out there, and taking the time to actually check and do as much. There's only so much that you can do, but actually taking the time to try to check some of these things that are going around.
We usually talk about advantages when we have plural outlets and many voices participating in the discussion, but of course, as we just saw, that can also be a big problem. Fabian, technology has enabled all sorts of media outlets to be reporting on armed conflicts and on wars. What does that more plural coverage mean for getting to know the truth?
What did you say the last? I didn't understand. The last term of your sentence?
What does it mean when it comes to getting to know the truth, to know what's true, if we have more voices than before and more participants than before reporting?
I think you need more
time. You can put your microphone a little bit closer.
So I think time is a big point. So like take your time to check if the information is true or not true, also for yourself. Also maybe in news it has to go fast, but maybe it's better to go a step back. Or also use other formats or productions where you can explain more about the backgrounds to explain them in different kind of channels. Like, for example, in our production, it's like we publishing on YouTube and also on TikTok, and we try to give on both sides different parts also of information. So on YouTube, we have the chance to get or to publish longer documentaries. On TikTok, we also publish like explainers who like maybe give more background information about a topic or about, for example, just a term like artillery to explain it to a younger audience. What is it and where does it come from? So it's a simple example, but you can use it in all other ways. So take the time and try to see all sides.
Time is certainly a problem in that context because information is circulating very rapidly. Now you say to check the information, to make sure it's correct. But Sevgil, I mean, working in the country and with the country that is under attack, I can only imagine that you get so much information. How do you know what's true? Because that's the question that all my friends ask me as a journalist all the time. Like, how do you know that's true? And it's like the most difficult question to answer.
First of all, I want to add one sentence about the access to the internet. I remember how in the first days of the war, I received a call from my friend from Mariupol, and Mariupol was under attack that time, and he cried and he said only one sentence, okay, is it true that Kyiv is already surrounded? So what happened? So people, they didn't have an access to internet, and Russians spread information that city is already under occupation and Kyiv is under Russian control. And that's all, so, and how it works. And actually, when I visited all these celebrated villages after kind of the leave in Russian occupation, they told me that the most hardest thing was to leave, was to survive not only without water and without food, but the most difficult was to stay without news, and it's also important. In the first days of war, we received, it's about your question, we received thousands and thousands of messages from people in all of our cities, for example, from Kherson, from Novaya Kakhovka, because this occupation started from different parts, and I was receiving like thousands of images from our readers, but we used technology, we used tools just to confirm it, and also as many sources as we had, so even sometimes official sources were not credible. So it is also possible in the war times, you have to use as many sources as you can. And thanks to our to the trust of our media, we were able to receive this information from different sources and to verify this information. And so it's incredible work of my team. And I remember how like first months we worked like 24/7. It is still like that. Much easier now, but the first days were very difficult in terms of truth and in terms of providing truthful information. And it was the most important. Now, of course, we are able to even publish an investigation, anti-corruption investigations, work documenting, etc. But the first months of war were only breaking news 24/7, and even me as a chief editor, I was writing news because news was the most important source of information for people, and Ukrainska Pravda as well.
Now, you talked about tools, you talked about a team, but what if you're there on your own? Ron, what happens with the influx of information that you get when you are reporting on the ground and may not have access, or at least not immediately, to tools, to a team, or to an editor-in-chief who can, at least assess it with you?
Well, I think I'm using my skills, even though I'm a photographer, I'm a photojournalist, I'm using my journalism skills. I'm speaking with people, I'm trying to verify, I'm working, most of these times I'm working with somebody else, usually a producer, a Ukrainian producer in this case, of Ukraine, so there's no misunderstandings with language and so on. But it's incredibly important, and one of the things that's often underappreciated in terms of photography, and especially related to misinformation, is the caption. And the caption is absolutely crucial, that it absolutely verifies what you are looking at, because often when the caption is separated from the image, that's where the problems start to begin, and photographs can then start to be misused. So that is something that we as photojournalists take very seriously in our way to make sure that when we're representing our truthful representation of what we're seeing to you, it is both with text and imagery.
At this point, also a very important note, Ron's work is actually an exhibition here. You can see his work displayed not only here at the Global Media Forum, but also on an online platform. So that is, of course, the work of Ron Haviv. When we talk about checking the sources, there's another big issue that we have to talk about, and I'd like to discuss that with you, Flourish. The military, you mentioned, has news outlets in Mali, for example, but the military also is increasingly participating in the media landscape through their own social media accounts, and it's an official source. But of course, and this is a phrase that I came across preparing for this panel, the goals of the soldiers are not compatible with the goals of the journalists, because the soldiers want to win a war and want to hide the horrors of the war, and the journalists want to expose the horrors of the war. How do you deal with the fact that increasingly we have more military sources participating in the discussions through their own accounts?
Well, it depends on, like for a journalist, it depends on where you're reporting from. If a Malian journalist is reporting about something that has to do with the soldiers in Mali, obviously they have to put their safety first and, you know, think about how they are wording their article or their videos and be very careful. And what I find is, in most cases, they actually have to work with the military government, not to, you know, propagate their own agenda, but, you know, form a kind of cooperation. Because the truth is, the military is not out there saying, oh, they're not overt about their own agenda. You know, they are not going to say, I'm the one sponsoring this, or it's kind of underground, you know. So at the same time, the journalists also have to be very smart. And another way that they do that is by cooperating with international journalists who are not, you know, facing the kind of challenges that they are facing. For example, I can do a report in Mali because I'm not living there. So my life is not in danger as much as someone who actually lives in, you know, Mali. So I think working with international organizations as well, you know, is a great way to kind of, you know, counter whatever fake news is coming from the authorities.
Now, there is a, let's say, more or less controversial statement that I read that was suggesting, and this is a question I would like to ask you, Sevgil, talking about official sources, that the fact that there are no NATO troops in Ukrainian territory might have led to the access to the information being more free or more available, because of course there wouldn't be as much scrutiny by all other participants that might be involved. Do you agree with that assessment? Do you think we are seeing as much coming out of Ukraine because it's only the Ukrainian military operating there?
Interesting question. I think that we have information because, you know, we are kind of, we are democracy. We are in war, but we are democracy in war. And people understand that the only way how they can be heard, that just to show this truth and just to show this story of Ukraine. And that's why I think that a lot of journalists have an access to the territories, they have an access to the brigades, they have an access to military, Ukrainian militaries. Unfortunately, sometimes, of course, we have restrictions, but we have a discussion with our authorities, so we cannot be manipulated because, of course, they do respect kind of our job, and they do understand why it's important to show kind of war crimes, for example. And that's why even, for example, the last story with Kherson, which was flooded by after the damage of this dam, Novokakhovka Dam, and it's also, I will tell later about the balance and how actually foreign media show this story in different way. So the story of Kherson. First, our authorities told us that, of course, we will not have access. I mean, journalists will not have access to this territory because it's flooded and it's dangerous. And we just started this rescue support for people. But then they understood that, of course, journalists will show what's going on, and it's important for people just to understand the situation, the real situation. They listened journalists. they listen to Ukrainian journalists, they listen to foreign journalists. So we have this discussion. It's possible to have the discussion. But at the same time, I think that when we speak about the situation with the dam that was damaged by Russians, I remember that first day of when it happened, a lot of media still had a discussion who is responsible for that. And the titles were absolutely inappropriate and unfair for Ukrainian side. And this is so, and it's not only about that one side accused another, Russia accused Ukraine and Ukraine accused Russia. It was also about who controlled this dam. And people and a lot of foreign media, they didn't provide this context that dam was under Russian control for several months, that the only who had an access to this dam were Russians, and for some reasons that context was absolutely absent in a lot of publications in the first days when it happened. That's why it's also about what I told in the beginning, that this battle for the truth is still going on, and it's important just to think not only about balance, but about the truth, and to fight for the truth, and to show what's really going on, and to provide a context for many situations. Because this is unfair just to say that, okay, Russia accused Ukraine, Ukraine accused Russia, but okay, for some reason we didn't provide the context who had an access. And actually, this weekend, New York Times published an investigation, so that it was explosion inside the dam, and the only way how it was possible, it was absolutely from Russian side. But still.
Now, clearly, from what you're telling us, media outlets have a difficulty distinguishing what's true, what's not true. Fabian, working with some of the most important public broadcasters here in Germany, do you think there need to be structural changes when we're talking about war reporting in the digital era in order to process that information more efficiently or in a better way? What's your take on the way newsrooms are structured?
So I'm not working in the newsroom, so maybe cannot tell so much about that. But I would say we need a lot more people there, maybe, covering different sides of conflicts, and also need the time to do that, and also dealing with like how we present the information. It's like maybe you can do just a coverage, you do your reportings, but you also have to be more there and show what people are telling, and try to also, like I always come back to young audiences because we're producing for a younger audience, and it's like, I think the accountability that they can trust us is very important. So what we are also like doing is showing more behind the scenes, like how we work, like to make transparent how we work. I think that's also a time in disinformation and fake news very important, that we create the trust to the people. And if we show like how we work behind the scenes, where we live there, how we work, of course always in matters of security issues, then you can also like maybe get more people to view it. And also like this also changes structures, because you have to show more of yourself, of your work, and working more with hosts, like also in reportages. And yeah, I would say that's one way. You're still showing how it's done. You wanted to say something to add to that?
Yes, I wanted to say that with the existence of the internet and social media, it's very easy for journalists who are in the newsroom and not on the field to kind of source their information online. But I think we need to take the extra step of actually, making phone calls and talking to people on the ground. Because what I find is, especially with reporting on Africa, there is a certain agenda that, most international media kind of are just saying the same thing. And if you just dig deeper a little bit, you discover that it's not that black and white. I'll give you an example. In a country like Nigeria, for example, Nigeria is, a big focus for DW and for many international organizations. So there are lots of journalists on the ground to work with. But a country like Mali, for example, in reporting about the new constitution, a lot of media organizations just emphasize the fact that the president is now getting like a lot of power and, not really explaining what that meant in the Malian context. And what that really meant was that the president was no longer going to be just a figurehead, and this is something that applies in many countries, not just Mali, but it just made it look like Mali was the military government was trying to hold on to power for longer. So I just think that, especially with reporting on Africa, if we can make more contacts with people who are actually there and can explain the context of the information, better, I think in terms of structure, it will make us make better stories, and stories that, even people reading it back there, they read it and they know, okay, this person actually knows what they are saying. It's not like they read it and they're like, what does this mean, So, and it also increases the trust that people have in the media.
I would like to now open the discussion, of course, to your questions, but we also have a survey that will be displayed in our monitors. You can participate in the survey, scanning a QR code for the few minutes that we have, and I encourage you to vote on the yes/no question that we will have displayed in the meantime. Does anyone would like to ask a question? I have one question here in the front. You can scan this QR code and you will get the question, which is, should journalists be the gatekeepers of the truth and war reporting?
Hello.
The options are...
I'm Musaieva from Mosgar. Everyone have cell phone today, and if digital reporting is so accessible and easy, so how come Afghanistan topics are completely forgotten? Like today, 639 days that girls and women are not going to school and university. So if the in digital era, the reporting is so easy, so how come this is happened?
About the visibility of the conflict in Afghanistan. Is the question for one particular panelist?
For about the digital era, yeah.
Does anyone want to reply to that? What's your take?
Well, I haven't worked in Afghanistan since the Taliban took over, but it's not, I don't think saying it's easy, it's not easy just because you have the ability to have a mobile phone. I mean, there are many other things that can become hindrances in using examples from colleagues of mine that have worked there. You are followed, you are watched, you are, as a foreigner, you are obviously somebody for them to pay attention to. People are afraid to speak to you, and that's often an issue. But of course, the bigger issue is Afghanistan is and was such an important story, and now it's sort of dropped off the map. And it comes back to many of these decisions why the world's media kind of gravitates towards one story and not another. When you look at what happens with Eritrea and Ethiopia, so many people ignored such an important story for so long. And this is also due to the fact that the media is trying to interpret what you, the audience, wants to see. So you should also, people need to be proactive. If you want to make sure the DW or BBC or The Economist is talking more about places that you're not hearing about, you can write to them, you can email, you can speak, and they will go because they're there to sell advertising to some degree, not everybody, but some. And if they know that people are coming to watch a story about Afghanistan, they'll go do a story about Afghanistan.
Unfortunately, I just was told that we have to leave it there. That's all we have time for, only one question. But you answered a question, should journalists be the gatekeepers of war reporting? And here are the results. 52.35% of you said yes, 17% say no, and 30% of the audience says they aren't anymore. So, of course, this is a topic that we can discuss for a long time, for sure. It's one of the hot topics. Of course, you also have access to our panelists, which I would like to thank you for your participation. You can talk to them. You can continue discussing this topic of war reporting in the digital age. Unfortunately, due to schedule reasons, I now have to put an end to our panel. But thank you so much for the insights, for your clarity, and for the way you are leading us in order to do our work, which is very difficult, in a more responsible way. Thank you so much. And a big applause for them.